Michael, let's start there. Doctors Without Borders says the story behind the bombing just keeps on changing. It's condemning the attack, demanding independent investigation. How likely is that? And I want to get your thoughts on all of this.
Well, first, it's a terrible tragedy, and I think that my country and NATO probably made a mistake, probably made a serious mistake in even trying to carry out this kind of an attack near a known hospital. So I'm in general disagreement with our policy, but I do not think it amounts to a war crime. There was certainly no intention of hurting innocent people. I'm not as interested in the independent investigation. I do think the U.S. military needs to be more clear, acknowledging that this was a terrible tragedy, expressing deep remorse and sadness, and also indicating that it will do a very, very thorough and prompt investigation. But in the meantime, saying that it's quite questionable that this should have ever been allowed to happen. And in fact, that it does appear there were serious mistakes. I would say all those things right now. That's the way I look at it.
Okay, so looking at it, saying it's serious mistakes, how do you suppose something like this could happen?
Well, I think that the Afghan troops that you were referring to, who were not apparently accompanied by any Americans, but nonetheless are our allies in the fight to liberate Kunduz from a terrible occupying force that took the city illegally last week, the Taliban. We were trying to help our ally liberate a city of 300,000 from an unlawful invader. So let's not lose sight of what happened here, and that the Afghan government has right on its side. They're doing the correct thing, the moral thing, the legal thing. And we felt that what we could do to help them by attacking Taliban positions that were undoubtedly deliberately right next to the hospital might be helpful to them. I understand the logic. I just don't agree with the decision, because when you have this kind of a hospital, I think you need to avoid this kind of attack close to it, even if in your own logic, you can explain why it makes sense in some broader campaign.
Okay, so talking about that logic and a couple of the words you threw out there, a moral thing, a right thing. For the people of Afghanistan, and I know you've traveled there quite a bit, what does this do in terms of damaging the U.S. and NATO's campaign there? Because there have been a lot of civilian casualties along the way, and on both sides. It's fair to say that the Taliban have killed civilians as well. But they've seen this in the past. How does it damage the U.S. and their efforts there?
Well, first of all, the civilian casualties have been overwhelmingly from the Taliban. So again, we have to be very clear here. I am being critical of a specific decision by my country, but I think it's important to not blur everything together here as if all sides are acting with equal authority. Again, this was the Afghan army and police that constructed a campaign plan to liberate their own city from an unlawful and brutal occupier. And they asked for the NATO coalition to help them with some airstrikes. I think we made a mistake in agreeing to carry out those strikes. Probably we needed to run the risk of some greater Afghan army and police casualties, because if the alternative was to damage a hospital with innocent children and medical workers inside of it, the only major hospital in Kunduz, I think that was not worth doing, and we needed to let the Afghan army find a better way, even if it might have been costlier to the army itself and ultimately slower. So that's where I come down. I think the Afghan people recognize their government is trying to win a war against a brutal enemy, and they generally appreciate what the government is doing, and they generally appreciate what the United States is doing, even though this tragedy, I think, was so regrettable and such a mistake.
And damaging in terms of how it damages the U.S., getting back to that question, how does it damage them?
Well, I just want to express sadness and my regret about the loss of life. I'm not sure it's going to have such huge ramifications for the broader campaign. The Afghan government right now knows that President Obama is mulling over a possible extension of the U.S. presence in Afghanistan. The Afghan government of Ghani and Abdullah, I think, wants to encourage the United States to stay. It doesn't act the way that President Karzai did. He would have been extremely angry and very public with his anger in this kind of a situation. I think Ghani and Abdullah are showing restraint because they recognize this was not done out of evil intent. It was perhaps a big mistake, but it was not done out of evil intent. And frankly, we need to keep working together in this war. So I'm not sure it's going to have lasting implications, but it's obviously a huge tragedy.
All right, Michael, thanks so much for joining us. Certainly appreciate it.